The new CEO is waiting. Don't embarrass me. Victoria Sterling grabbed my arm as I rushed through the lobby doors, 9 minutes late. Her fingernails dug into my skin through my blazer. I'm sorry, there was a situation outside. I don't want excuses. I want you invisible and silent in that meeting. Do you understand? Say nothing unless directly asked, and even then, keep it brief. I nodded, smoothing my hair as we speed-walked toward the executive conference room. My heart was racing, not from the rush, but from what had just happened outside. A man in a work uniform had been sitting on the bench near our building entrance. Gray coveralls, dusty boots. He'd looked exhausted, hungry, defeated. I'd stopped. I don't know why. Something about his expression reminded me of my own father after he lost his construction job when I was 12. "Excuse me," I'd said. "Are you okay?" He'd looked up, surprised. "Just waiting for someone, running late, apparently." "Have you eaten today?" He hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. I handed him my lunch, a container of pasta I'd made the night before, and a bottle of water. "You don't have to." "Please, I insist. My grandmother always said you should never walk past someone who needs help." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed his tired face. "Your grandmother sounds wise. Thank you, Miss Maya Chen." "Thank you, Maya Chen. I'll remember this." I'd hurried inside, already late, already dreading Victoria's reaction. And now here I was, being dragged toward a meeting where the new CEO would be introduced, the mysterious executive who'd been appointed to transform Horizon Consulting after our previous leadership had retired. Nobody knew anything about him, not his name, not his background, just rumors about his unconventional approach to business. Victoria positioned me at the far end of the conference table, as far from the head as possible, her usual spot for me during important meetings, invisible, forgettable. "Try not to speak," she hissed. "Your presence here is purely administrative." I'd been at Horizon for 6 years, built client relationships that generated millions, developed frameworks that other consultants now used as templates, but to Victoria, I was always administrative. The room filled with senior partners, regional directors, and department heads. Victoria took her seat near the head of the table, the seat reserved for the COO, which she'd somehow claimed despite being only a senior vice president. We waited. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the door opened, and my heart stopped. The man who walked in wasn't wearing dusty boots anymore. He was in a perfectly tailored navy suit, silver cufflinks, the tired expression replaced by quiet confidence. The man from the bench, the man I'd given my lunch to. He walked to the head of the table, sat down, looked around the room with assessing eyes. Then his gaze landed on me. The faintest smile crossed his face. "Good morning. I'm David Okonkwo, your new CEO." Before I reveal what David Okonkwo said next and how 5 minutes of kindness exposed years of cruelty, let me pause here. If you've ever been treated as invisible by someone who should have valued you, if you've ever done something kind without expecting anything in return, if you've ever wondered whether good actions actually matter in a corporate world that rewards self-interest, this one's going to restore some faith. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more people being diminished right now, more people whose kindness goes unrecognized, more people who need to believe that sometimes the universe pays attention. Hit that subscribe button. Become part of what we're building here. Because what David Okonkwo observed in that meeting and what he did about it changed everything. Let me explain how a container of homemade pasta led to the most satisfying moment of my career. My name is Maya Chen. I was 34 when I gave my lunch to a stranger who turned out to be the most powerful person in my company. Single by circumstance, not entirely by choice. 6 years at Horizon Consulting had consumed most of my personal life. Weekends preparing client presentations, evenings on conference calls, first dates canceled because Victoria needed something urgent at 9 p.m. on a Friday. I joined Horizon believing in the company's mission, helping businesses transform themselves for better outcomes. I'd stayed because leaving felt like admitting defeat. Victoria Sterling had been my supervisor for 4 of those 6 years. From the beginning, our relationship was complicated. She didn't like me. I never fully understood why. Maybe because clients preferred working with me directly. Maybe because my recommendations often contradicted hers, and mine worked better. Maybe because I'd inadvertently corrected her in a meeting once, early on, when she'd given inaccurate information to a client. That correction, delivered politely and with complete accuracy, had made her an enemy. Since then, Victoria had systematically worked to diminish me, taking credit for my analysis in executive presentations, excluding me from meetings with major clients, criticizing my work in front of colleagues, then praising it when speaking to partners, as her own ideas. The pattern was subtle enough to seem like normal office politics, but over 4 years, it accumulated into something that felt deliberately cruel. I'd considered leaving many times, had other offers, but Horizon was where I'd built my expertise, my reputation, my network. Walking away felt like letting Victoria win. So I stayed, documented everything, hoped someday someone would notice. That morning, watching David Okonkwo take his seat at the head of the table, I realized someone finally had. He introduced himself briefly, background in turnaround management, experience restructuring companies that had lost their way, a philosophy he called authentic leadership. I want to understand how this company really operates, not the polished presentations, not the official narratives, the actual daily reality of working here. Victoria leaned forward, ready to provide her version of that reality. David, I'd be happy to walk you through our culture and... I preferred to observe first, see things for myself before receiving interpretations. He smiled pleasantly, but Victoria's momentum was clearly blocked. I'll be spending the next 2 weeks having conversations with employees at every level, learning what Horizon actually is versus what we claim to be. His eyes swept the room again, paused on me for a moment that felt significant. Let's begin with introductions. Tell me your name, your role, and one thing you wish leadership understood about your work. Victoria immediately tried to redirect. Perhaps we could save the individual introductions for... I'd prefer to do them now. His tone remained pleasant but unmistakably final. The introductions began. Senior partners described their portfolios, regional directors discussed their territories. Each response was polished, professional, forgettable. Then it reached Victoria. Victoria Sterling, Senior Vice President of Client Strategy. I oversee our most important accounts and drive revenue growth across... And what do you wish leadership understood about your work? Victoria paused, clearly not expecting to answer that part. I suppose that client management is more complex than outsiders realize, that maintaining these relationships requires extensive personal effort that often goes unrecognized. Interesting. David made a note. Then his eyes moved to me. And you are? Before I could answer, Victoria interrupted. This is Maya Chen, one of our support consultants. She handles administrative elements of client documentation and... I asked Miss Chen. Victoria's mouth closed abruptly. Every eye in the room shifted to me, the invisible consultant at the far end of the table, the administrative presence who wasn't supposed to speak. David waited with genuine interest. I'm Maya Chen, Senior Strategy Consultant. I emphasized the actual title, the one Victoria never used when describing me. I develop client engagement frameworks and growth strategies. And what do you wish leadership understood about your work? I hesitated. Victoria's glare burned from across the table. But something about David's expression, patient, genuinely curious, free of judgment, made me answer honestly. I wish leadership understood who actually does the work versus who presents it. Silence. David's pen paused over his notebook. That's a very specific observation, Miss Chen. Can you elaborate? Victoria's face had gone rigid. A mask of professional composure stretched over barely contained fury. What Maya means is, I'd like to hear what Maya means from Maya. The directness silenced Victoria completely. Around the table, senior partners exchanged glances. This wasn't how executive meetings usually went. I knew I was standing at an edge. The safe response was to backtrack, soften, retreat into corporate vagueness. But David Okonkwo had given me his pasta when he was hungry. He'd looked at me like a person, not a uniform. He'd said he wanted to understand how the company really operated. So I told him, in my experience, the gap between contribution and recognition can be significant. Work done at lower levels is often presented by higher levels as their own. Analysis developed by one person appears in another person's presentation. Credit flows upward while accountability flows downward. That sounds like a systematic concern, not an isolated observation. It is, systematic and long-standing. Victoria's voice cut in, sharp with controlled alarm. Maya is relatively junior. Her perspective may be limited by her position in the organization. Senior strategy consultant doesn't sound junior to me. David checked his notes. How long have you been at Horizon, Ms. Chen? 6 years. And in that time, what's your client retention rate on accounts you've personally managed? I paused. That statistic wasn't supposed to be known. Victoria had restructured reporting to obscure individual contributions. I'd have to verify the exact numbers, but approximately 94%. That's exceptional by industry standards. David turned to Victoria. What's the firm-wide average? Victoria hesitated. Retention metrics are complex. We measure success through multiple. The firm-wide average, Ms. Sterling. Approximately 71%. So Ms. Chen's personal retention rate exceeds the firm average by 23 percentage points. David wrote something down. Interesting that she's seated at the end of the table handling administrative elements. The room had gone very quiet. Victoria attempted recovery. Maya is certainly valued. Her role may have been understated in my earlier description. She's actually quite... Ms. Sterling, I spent the morning walking around your building, speaking with employees, observing interactions. Several people mentioned that genuine talent here is often managed carefully by those above them, kept out of visibility, given credit for work only when necessary. I can't speak to random complaints. They weren't random. They were remarkably consistent. He looked around the table. I've turned around 7 companies in my career. The first thing I learned is that organizational culture reveals itself in patterns. Who gets invited to meetings, who speaks and who stays silent, who receives credit publicly versus privately. His gaze returned to Victoria. In the 40 minutes I've observed this meeting, I've noticed several concerning patterns, but I'd rather not draw conclusions from limited data. He stood. Ms. Chen, I'd like to continue this conversation privately. Would you have lunch available? I almost laughed at the irony. Actually, I gave my lunch away this morning to someone who needed it. David smiled, that same warm, genuine smile from the bench outside. Then allow me to return the favor. We'll order something. My assistant will find us a conference room. He walked toward the door, clearly expecting me to follow. Victoria's voice rang out. David, I really should be present for any discussions involving my direct reports. That won't be necessary, Ms. Sterling. I prefer unfiltered information. He held the door open for me. I walked out without looking back. Behind me, I heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath, the rustling of bodies shifting uncomfortably, the absolute silence of a room watching power dynamics shift. David's private conference room turned out to be a quiet corner of the cafe down the street. He'd changed back into the gray coveralls from the morning. "I hope you don't mind the casual attire," he said as we settled into a booth. "The suit is for boardrooms. This is who I actually am." Most CEOs would want to maintain the formal image. Most CEOs are more concerned with appearance than understanding. I found that people talk more honestly when I look like someone who works for a living. We ordered sandwiches, his treat, as promised. He asked about my background, my path to consulting, what I'd hoped to find at Horizon versus what I'd actually experienced. I found myself telling him things I'd never voiced aloud: the systematic credit theft, the exclusion from client presentations, the performance reviews where my documented achievements mysteriously became team efforts, while my minor mistakes became personal failings. How long has this been happening with Victoria specifically? 4 years, since shortly after she was promoted to SVP. And you've stayed? I've considered leaving, often, but leaving felt like losing, like proving that her approach works, that if you diminish talented people long enough, they eventually give up. David was quiet for a moment, his sandwich untouched. "Can I tell you something about why I was sitting on that bench this morning?" "Of course." I arrived 2 hours before the meeting started, came in work clothes specifically so I could walk around unrecognized, talk to people who didn't know I was the new CEO. That's unconventional. It's essential. The official information people give executives is almost always filtered, sanitized, protective. The truth lives in the margins, in the conversations happening when leadership isn't watching. He pulled out a small notebook from his coverall pocket. Handwritten notes covered the pages. "In 2 hours of anonymous observation, I heard your name mentioned 7 times by different people, all in the context of doing the actual work that someone else presents." My chest tightened. I'd suspected others noticed. I hadn't realized they talked about it. I also heard Victoria's name mentioned, different context, taking credit, blocking promotion, making talented people invisible. He set down the notebook. "Then I met you, rushing through the lobby, and instead of focusing on your own urgency, you stopped to help someone who looked like he needed kindness. You looked hungry. It wasn't complicated. It's extremely complicated. Compassion under pressure reveals character. You could have walked past. Most people would have. You didn't. My grandmother always said that you should never walk past someone who needs help. Yes, you mentioned that." He smiled. "Maya, character isn't what people do when they're being observed. It's what they do when nobody's watching, when there's no benefit, when kindness costs them something." I was late to a meeting because of that kindness. Victoria was furious. Victoria is furious about many things, I suspect. None of them reflect poorly on you. He pushed his notebook toward me. "I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks investigating patterns at Horizon: credit attribution, promotion decisions, the gap between documented contributions and public recognition. I suspect what I find will be illuminating. What do you want from me? Honesty, which you've already provided, and patience. What needs to happen will take time to do properly." What needs to happen? David's expression shifted. The warmth remained, but something harder emerged beneath it. The right people need to be recognized, and the wrong people need to face consequences. The next 2 weeks were strange. David Okonkwo moved through Horizon like a ghost in coveralls, appearing in break rooms, joining lunch conversations uninvited, asking questions that sounded casual but clearly weren't. He requested files, email archives, project documentation with original authorship preserved, performance reviews going back 5 years. Victoria tried to manage his access, offered curated information packages, suggested which employees would be most helpful to interview. David politely declined all of it. "I prefer to discover things myself," he told her. "Guidance tends to obscure as much as it reveals." I watched Victoria's composure crack incrementally. The confident SVP who'd controlled narratives for years suddenly couldn't control the most important narrative of all. She started being nicer to me, publicly, praising my work in meetings, mentioning my contributions to senior partners. Too late, I thought. Far too late. On day 12, David called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the largest conference room. Those who didn't fit watched via video. He stood at the front, suit restored, the gravity of the moment requiring formality. I've spent 2 weeks learning about Horizon Consulting, what works, what doesn't, where we excel, and where we've gone fundamentally wrong. The room was silent. Careers hung on what he said next. Let me be direct. This company has exceptional talent, dedicated professionals who genuinely want to help clients succeed. The quality of work produced here is remarkable. Shoulders relaxed slightly. Relief rippled through the audience. However, the word landed like a stone. That talent has been mismanaged, systematically, over years by leaders who prioritized personal advancement over organizational health. Shoulders tensed again. Victoria's face had gone carefully blank. I've identified patterns of credit misattribution that are frankly staggering. Work documented as belonging to one person being presented by another, promotions blocked for talented individuals who might outshine their supervisors, a culture where visibility depends not on competence but on proximity to power. He pulled out a folder, thick with papers. This folder contains documentation of specific instances, names attached, evidence preserved. I'm not going to read them publicly, that would compound the harm already done, but the people in this room who know they're in this folder, they know. His gaze swept across the senior leadership, lingered on Victoria for a moment that felt eternal. Starting today, Horizon operates differently. Credit belongs to those who create. Contribution determines advancement. Authenticity replaces performance. He set down the folder. Additionally, I'm making immediate changes to leadership structure. Some of you will be invited to continue in your roles, some will not. Those decisions reflect patterns observed over 2 weeks, not isolated incidents, but systematic behaviors. He looked directly at Victoria. Miss Sterling, a word in my office after this meeting. Victoria's face had turned ashen. The confident SVP who'd told me to be invisible and silent 2 weeks ago now looked like she might be sick. The rest of you may return to work. Individual conversations will be scheduled as needed. The meeting dissolved. People scattered. Whispered conversations erupted in clusters. I stayed in my seat, processing what had just happened. David paused by my chair on his way out. Conference room B, 30 minutes. I'd like you present for what comes next. Then he was gone. Conference room B held 3 people. David Okonkwo, Victoria Sterling, and me. Victoria had clearly been crying, her perfect composure finally shattered. But there was something else in her expression too, defiance. The kind that emerges when someone knows they're caught but refuses to accept consequences. I don't understand why she's here, Victoria said, gesturing toward me. This is a personnel matter between you and me. Miss Chen is here because she's directly relevant to the discussion. David set the thick folder on the table. Over 4 years, you've systematically stolen her work, blocked her advancement, and diminished her professionally. She deserves to witness the consequences. Stolen is a strong word. It's the accurate word. I have 17 documented instances of presentations where Maya's analysis appeared under your name. 9 occasions where you excluded her from client meetings, specifically to prevent her visibility. 4 performance reviews where you acknowledged her contributions privately while characterizing them as team efforts officially. Victoria's jaw tightened. Collaboration is part of our culture. Collaboration implies shared credit. You took exclusive credit for work you didn't do. David opened the folder. Would you like me to read specific examples? The Hartwell Industries growth strategy that earned you a bonus while Maya wasn't mentioned. The Morrison Group engagement plan that you presented to the board as your approach. Those were collaborative. Those were Maya's. I have the original documents with her authorship, the timestamps, the email chains where she sent you drafts, and you presented them unchanged except for the removal of her name. Silence. Victoria, I've turned around 7 companies. I've seen every form of corporate dysfunction imaginable, but what you've done here is particularly corrosive. You didn't just take credit for one person's work, you built your career on systematically suppressing talented people beneath you. I've delivered results. You've delivered other people's results and called them your own. That's not leadership, that's exploitation. Victoria's defiance finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure, the competition for advancement. If I hadn't taken control of how work was presented, someone else would have been recognized for their contributions, and you couldn't allow that. Victoria had nothing left to say. David turned to me. Maya, you've been at this company for 6 years. You've produced exceptional work that was systematically stolen. You've maintained professionalism despite treatment that would have driven most people away. I didn't want to let her win. You didn't, but your persistence shouldn't have been necessary. Horizon failed you. I'm sorry for that. He looked back at Victoria. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive standard severance, no more. Any attempt to mischaracterize this termination publicly will be met with legal action. The documentation I have assembled would not reflect well on you in any professional context. Victoria stood. The defiance returned briefly. You're destroying my career over a personality conflict with a junior consultant. I'm ending your career over documented theft of intellectual contribution. The personality conflict is irrelevant. David's voice remained calm. Security will escort you to collect personal items. You have 30 minutes. Victoria walked out without looking at me. The door closed behind her. David sat quietly for a moment. How do you feel? I honestly don't know. Relieved, sad, vindicated. All of it. That's appropriate. This situation has layers. He pulled out a second folder, much thinner. But I'd like to discuss something more forward-looking. What's that? Your future at Horizon, specifically the role of Senior Vice President of Client Strategy, the position Victoria just vacated. I stared at him. You're offering me her job? I'm offering you a job that matches your demonstrated capability. You've been doing SVP-level work for years, just without the title, compensation, and recognition. He slid the folder toward me. This is a preliminary offer, negotiable. Take time to review it. I opened the folder. The numbers were significantly higher than my current compensation. The authority was comprehensive. The recognition was explicit. Why me? Because you gave your lunch to a stranger when you were already late for a meeting. Because you stayed at a company that mistreated you rather than surrendering to someone who wanted you gone. Because 7 different people mentioned your name when I asked who actually does good work here. He stood. And because you'll do the job better than anyone else I could hire. That's not sentiment, that's assessment. 6 months have passed since that conference room conversation. I'm Senior Vice President of Client Strategy now, the role Victoria held while stealing my work, the position I'd earned years ago but couldn't access. My first act as SVP was reviewing every member of my department, not to find fault, to find contribution. Who actually did what? Whose work was being presented by whom? I discovered 3 other analysts whose contributions had been systematically appropriated, not by Victoria, she was gone, but by patterns that had normalized across the organization. We fixed it, publicly. Attribution became non-negotiable. Credit traveled with the creator, not with whoever had the most impressive title. David Okonkwo transformed Horizon in ways that went far beyond my personal situation. He restructured leadership around competence rather than politics, promoted people whose results spoke louder than their self-promotion, created systems that made credit theft difficult rather than convenient. Culture isn't what you say you value, he told me once. It's what you actually reward. I'm making sure Horizon rewards the right behaviors. Victoria Sterling landed somewhere else eventually, a smaller firm that didn't check references carefully. I heard she was being managed out within 8 months. Some patterns don't change just because the venue does. I think about that morning sometimes, the moment I almost walked past a tired man on a bench, the decision to stop, to share, to treat a stranger with kindness that cost me exactly 1 container of pasta. 5 minutes of compassion. That's what it took. If I'd been more focused on the meeting, more worried about Victoria's reaction, more calculating about my own interests, I would have walked past, and everything would be different. David didn't promote me because I helped him. He promoted me because helping him revealed who I actually am, the character that emerges when nobody's watching, the values that persist when there's no benefit. Kindness isn't strategy, he told me after I accepted the SVP role, but it correlates remarkably well with the kind of person I want leading parts of my company. My grandmother died when I was 19. She never saw my corporate career, never witnessed Victoria's cruelty or David's intervention, or any of the complexity that defined these years. But she taught me the principle that changed everything. Never walk past someone who needs help. Sometimes the person you help turns out to be powerful. Sometimes they're just another struggling human who appreciates kindness. The outcomes vary. The principle doesn't. Help people because they need help, not because of what they might do for you. The rest takes care of itself. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This experience reminded me that invisible actions accumulate into visible consequences, eventually. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more people being diminished by toxic bosses right now, more people whose contributions are being stolen, more people who need to believe that kindness matters, even when nobody's watching. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with every person who's ever given without expecting return, every person whose work was claimed by someone else, every person waiting for the moment when someone finally notices. Tell them about the stranger on the bench. Tell them about Victoria's face when she finally faced consequences. Tell them about 5 minutes of kindness that changed a career. Drop a comment with your experience, the time you helped someone without expecting anything, the toxic boss who finally got what they deserved, the moment when invisible actions became visible. I read every single one, usually in my corner office, the one that used to belong to someone who thought I should be silent and invisible. You're not invisible. Your kindness matters. We're building something meaningful here. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And remember, the person you help today might not be powerful. They might never do anything for you in return. Help them anyway. Sometimes the universe notices. Sometimes it doesn't. But you'll know who you are. That matters more than any promotion.